The talk is getting ready to begin at 11 a.m. Just 1 minute.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this last talk. My name is Juan Montoya, and I'm a co-founder of edX, a company that for the past 8 years have been promoted the adoption of the OpenEdX platform worldwide. The talk I'm presenting today is titled OpenEdX in the e-learning technology space, and it aims to bring you some insight into some of the things that we have learned along the way, both as a company and as members of the OpenEdX marketing group. So the OpenEdX platform, as you all know, has been out in the open for 8 years. Most of us have witnessed its constant evolution with improvements coming from different fronts, including the architecture, the technology upgrades, functionality, look and feel, integration capabilities, internationalization, accessibility, documents, and many other fronts. And this evolution has taken place while the platform global impact grew to an impressive estimation of 100 million learners reached worldwide. That's edX plus OpenEdX combined, in thousands of adopting sites where a large number of courses are being given. And even though it's not a commercial product, all this work and impact has gained it a well-deserved place in the complex and competitive space of online learning technologies. So this talk aims to take a look into how that particular market has been configuring over time, some of the tools and instruments you will find to compare between competing products, a deep dive into the criteria that can be used for these evaluations, an internal assessment of the OpenEdX platform against set criteria, and finally, a comparison between OpenEdX and some of the alternatives in the market. So let's start. The LMS market has been through at least 20 years of uninterrupted evolution and growth. It's a market forecasted to become worth $25 billion worldwide by 2025. And of course, the COVID pandemic has provided some unique conditions for it to grow even beyond those expectations. Over this period, the LMS or learning management system has been the king somehow. It has transitioned from its initial approach of being a one-stop shop kind of solution suited for the use case of academic institutions to a more complex and diverse kind of solution that can have broader uses in companies of all sizes, NGOs, governments, and more recently, online academies, MOOC providers, so on and so forth. It has helped the world navigate from in-person trainings to instructor-led online learning, blended and student-led and on-demand online learning. As new solutions arise in this competitive market and try to differentiate themselves by tackling a more specific segment, we start seeing additional product definitions that compete to the LMS. So there is CMSs, which sometimes is confused of course management systems or content management systems. There is learning content management systems, LXPs for learning experience platform, learning relationship managers. There's micro-learning platforms, mobile learning platforms, adaptive learning platforms, and even MOOC platforms could be one product itself. But still, the LMS is the main point of reference and aggregator of all these solutions. As we know well, the main OpenEdX applications cover most of the functionality you would expect for an LMS, both for desktop and mobile, and also those for a learning content management system. And through complementary applications, such as e-commerce insights, there are some capabilities and integration possibilities for other specific needs. Now, in terms of market verticals, on one side, there are the well-established segments, such as K through 12 education, higher education, corporate learning. And on the other side, there are new technologies such as OpenEdX that are challenging the status quo, reinventing models, crossing the boundaries between those verticals, and looking for ways to create and deliver value. In lack of a better term, I'll call this new vertical online learning operators. And these aggregate some very important opportunities, as we all know, including online academies, MOOC providers, large nonprofits, government initiatives. Clearly, a lot of the software functionality that's required for building and delivering learning content may be quite similar across all segments, but each vertical has its own special needs and priorities, and there are ecosystems of solutions that have been focusing in covering them. So, for example, solutions for the K through 12 technology market or vertical will focus more on blended learning tools, things to empower flipped classroom, things that will have to do with gamification or common core content integration, student, parent, teacher interactions, and integrations with the school management systems, for example. The higher ed vertical will be more focused on tools like web conferencing or tools that will help the transition from in-person teaching to blended and student-centered, but still focusing a lot on tracking and supporting individual students' performance, following career paths with credits, integrating content from digital libraries or content repositories and digital labs, and of course integrating with student management information systems. And the corporate learning vertical will tend to focus on things like employee onboarding, training and coaching, talent management, performance tracking, mapping the learning paths with the employee roles in the companies. Sometimes they will have to deal with recruiting or streamline recruiting, knowledge management, or even customer training and engagement. And finally, we have the online learning operators. Here, the needs may be widely diverse, but as we know from the OpenEdX experience, that includes things like interacting with the web content management systems, interacting with CRMs and marketing tools, interfacing with e-commerce solutions, content delivery, of course, delivering a learning experience that is engaging and significant, integrating with proctoring, identity verification services, online credentials, and more. So in this next section, let's look into the market reports and reviews. So traditionally, potential software buyers trying to select a software product to build on would reach among well-known industry analysts and market reports to help them navigate the complexity of the solutions space. Gartner is one of the leading firms. They created a well-renowned methodology called the Magic Quadrant that you're probably familiar with. This one maps the solutions available into a two-dimensional space, with the x-axis representing completeness of vision and the y-axis representing ability to execute, and then dividing the space into 4 quadrants for leaders, challengers, visionaries, and niche players. And they also provide complementary tools for analysis, such as one called critical capabilities, which is basically a ranking of the products based on the ratings they score for how well they cover certain use cases, how well the product covers certain use cases. Forrester is another well-known consultant. They produce a similar chart called the wave diagram, where there's the 2-axis map mapping the strength of the product strategy and the strength of the product offering. They also split into 4 regions, which in this case are represented in the image, and in this case they stand for leaders, strong performers, underperformers, contenders, and risky bets. These types of market reports and one-on-one consulting with the company experts are available at a price, but they are far from a perfect solution. They focus primarily on the corporate-oriented verticals, and being multi-sided markets, they are providing services simultaneously to software vendors, to investors, and to buyers. And their methodology, which is of course tied to their business model, can be skewed towards large vendors that purchase their services. And notably, open source solutions are not well aligned with that particular business model and are often excluded or misrepresented at best in these types of analysis. A recent evolution of this model that has gained traction in the past year relies on a combination of reviews, crowdsourced reviews, ideally made by the community of users, and more classic consultant analysis tools. Some of the commonly seen services in this space are G2, Software Advice, Trust Radius, Capterra, e-learning industry, to mention others. Some of those have been acquired by the big players. So Trust Software Advice, for example, and Capterra are owned by Gartner. And the methodologies and business models used here are building on the previous approach, but still it doesn't differ that much. They publish graphs that are very similar to the Magic Quadrant. G2, I have here some of those examples. G2 maps user satisfaction against market presence. Software Advice is mapping usability against user recommendation. And Trust Radius is mapping research frequency against a score that they compute. And they are still multi-sided market business models. So I think we can agree that these measurements are imperfect at best. And the precision of the results will rely on things like the overall recognition of the software product in the first place, the number and nature of user reviews that they get, how well the product is fitting within the definition of the particular category they're trying to map, the specific criteria they are using for building the scores, and unfortunately, the level of investment that's committed by the vendor towards the service. So how does the OpenEdX platform rank in these instruments? Perhaps we can get a few impressions from the audience in the chat. What do you think? Does it rank at the top, in the middle, at the bottom? Type away if you want. Make sure you select everyone so that all questions reach this podium. Let's give it a minute. Don't be shy. I intentionally don't want to show the graph again, but I will show it next. Well, we have a few comments coming in. So some people say at the top, in the middle, as a leader. It's a hard question because, of course, there are many categories and subsegments of the market. But our findings to these questions is, how does OpenEdX rank? Well, it doesn't rank for the most part. So in most of the review sites and charts that we researched, it doesn't appear at all, or it doesn't rank yet. Software Advice being the exception. Here is shown the category called Learning Management Systems Frontrunners as of April 2021. And it's the only one where it ranks kind of in the middle of the pack. I'm not going to look into the details of who else ranks, but let's try to understand the reasons why, in my view at least, this is happening. So one of them is the fact that OpenEdX is not perfectly fitted into any of those three best verticals I mentioned. Especially, these tools tend to be oriented to the corporate category. So focusing there helps OpenEdX not rank there. The fact that up until now it has not been aggressively marketed, as most of the commercial tools are. The fact that there is still confusion out there between edX and OpenEdX, even though everyone here probably has fought against that. In some review sites, you will find reviews that were supposed to be for open edX, but in reality were referring to edX.org, praising on the quality of the courses available or the availability of those courses for free. And finally, the fact that the methodologies and business models, as I mentioned, are not well aligned with open source solutions in general. And even when narrowing down the research for open source tools, open source solutions, in many of the review sites, we explored the open source were mixed with those that are free or that have freemium or free trials. So that adds a bit of confusion. And also very small scale and even inactive open source projects get to be included. That plays a bit against OpenEdX, and it dilutes some of its most relevant values. Here you see the top ranked solutions for open source and free, if that's a category, open source and free, in a few of the review sites. So OpenEdX is ranking 4th in software advice and 3rd in e-learning industry, and it's not ranking in the other two. Right. So going back to the potential buyer that needs to decide what to use. In our experience, medium and large initiatives will end up building their own list of criteria with often 100, 200, and even more items. And they will ask vendors to respond their compliance in detail in each of these criteria. These customized list of features tend to be very inefficient to score, of course, and they often bring the buyer misconceptions into the evaluation process. But still, there is a lot of value in having a well-refined set of criteria to compare. So in 2020, as part of the work being made at the OpenEdX marketing group, we engaged in a collaborative effort to put together our own list of criteria. And this exercise was very interesting. It brought together over 20 years of aggregated experience by OpenEdX providers, talking to and serving interested parties around the world. A big shout out to EduNext, Abstract Technologies, OpenCraft, and to the OpenEdX team at edX who contributed to the exercise I'm going to present. So what we did was producing and refining a list of 142 criteria. And this is tricky because you want to have as much detail as possible in order to have enriched results, but not so many that it becomes impractical to use. And what we tried to do was organizing the criteria in 4 main groups or big categories. So there is learner experience, educator experiences, management, and technology. And for each category, we defined a short list of subcategories that you see listed here on the screen. And they are currently sorted by their perceived importance for the overall assessment. So there are 34 of those subcategories, and inside each subcategory, there is normally 4 or 5 individual criterion that help us go into a great level of detail, adding up to 142 criteria, as I mentioned. Right, so in this next section, let's see how does OpenEdX perform against that criteria. So once we had the list, we scored it, initial individual criteria from 1 to 5. And then different stakeholders make the assessments, and then we average the results. So here we have the aggregated results by group and then by subcategory, which provides us with a summary of the areas where OpenEdX scores best and the areas where there's room for improvement. So in the learner experience group on the left, it scores best in accessibility and learning content delivery, and not so well in asynchronous discussions and collaborative learning tools. Keep in mind that the scale was from 0 to 5, and actually it was from 1 to 5, and it's a competitive market, so everyone is trying to do their best. In the educators category on the right, it scores best in the authoring platform and the availability of assessment types. And it scores less well in course configurations and support for different standards of learning content. We're glad to hear that we're making good progress in that improvement. Now, for the business or management functionality, it scores well in certificate management possibilities and learner grade management. and not so well in automated notifications and web content capabilities. And for the technology category or group, it excels in scalability and also in multi-tenancy possibilities. And the lowest scores were obtained in hosting flexibility and data protection compliance. So finally, I'm going to present the results of another exercise, an internal exercise in this case, done at edX, where 14 different LMS solutions were compared and scored against a very similar set of criteria. In this particular exercise, we were focusing on the use case of an organization that needed to serve online courses, but not necessarily MOOCs, just online courses, to a very large international multilingual audience in the range of 20,000 to 50,000 active users. A big thanks to Andreas Gran, who recently contributed the Moodle assessment to this exercise. It was originally 13, and with this we made it 14. I have to make the disclaimer here that this type of comparison can always be flawed, and of course, the methodology is far from perfect. It relies to a certain extent in the responses that are provided by vendors themselves and their availability to engage in the process. And we are, of course, fully invested in the OpenEdX platform, but we try to make our best effort not to skew the results towards OpenEdX or to any other solution. So let's see. Once the aggregated results were computed, there's a lot of information here, but I'm going to present only the big groups. For the learning experience group, the OpenEdX platform ranked in the 7th place. Here you see the list and the different scores. In the educators group, it ranked in the 13th position. In our view, this is influenced a lot by the fact that educators still feel a lot of complexity into building some content when they need to be faced with HTML code or JSON strings or things like that. And this is something that we can definitely work towards, because educators are a big driver of adoption of the platform. Sometimes they just start using some tool for their needs, and at some point it ends up being formalized at a larger scale. Right, for the business and management functionality, the platform ranked in the last place, and I believe this has to do with the way OpenEdX came to be as a byproduct of edX.org and the large scale of operation it's coming from, which leads to the management capabilities not being prioritized as they are in other kind of tools. And for the technology group criteria, here on the right, it ranked in the 6th position. So overall, for this exercise, when price or actually total cost of ownership was not included, the platform ranked in 13th place. But actually, the real exercise required us to include the total cost of ownership and also the capabilities at a scale in order to be able to serve 50,000 learners. So when we include that for that large audience, many of the options are too costly or not robust enough. And actually, OpenEdX makes it to the top 3. In this particular case. So I'll wrap up with the main conclusions of this exercise. It is a complex and competitive market, but it's a market with very high growth estimation. So it's a very interesting place to be in. OpenEdX has definitely the potential to be a stronger player in multiple market segments, or to be among the leaders in one new vertical that's taking shape. Currently, it is not widely visible in the industry's traditional or the new comparison tools. And we as the community could work to extend some of the functionality, to make it fit a bit better into the use cases of the other market verticals. Or we could also work together to market it more aggressively. And we, of course, started that work already as part of the marketing group. There is always a lot of work to be done there. There is no shortage of strengths of the platform to be leveraged and to drive adoption, including features, quality of the user experience, robustness, scalability, and the brand, the OpenEdX brand as such. And finally, there are also some gaps, of course, to be addressed to make the platform best suited for use cases that are further away from the use of edX.org. Right. So thank you for your attention. That was it. Let's see if we have time for some questions.
Thank you everyone for your attention and participation in the talk. We'll be happy to answer all your questions. Feel free to leave them in the chat box located on the left side of your screen.
Here's a question from Stefania. Why, in your opinion, the educators Yeah, I think the question is about why the educators, in the educators category, OpenEdX ranks in a lower position against other tools. As I was saying, I think it has to do with the fact that there is still a gap to be bridged for educators to actually access the platform. Of course, there are service providers out there bridging those gaps. But if you compare with other tools, it's even still a more complex tool to set up and start experimenting with as an educator. And even once you acquire it and start experimenting, you still need to be faced with understanding a lot of the technical specifics in order to build your course, which I suppose becomes a barrier for many educators to use it.
Okay, so we got one next question from Diana. She asks, who will you consider OpenEdX's bigger competitor and why?
Okay. So it's very hard to pinpoint a particular biggest competitor across all the opportunities. In specific sectors, for example, we have seen often the procurement processes are tied to Moodle, for example, from the start, perhaps because it has been around for so long, becoming a de facto standard, or perhaps, as Patrick mentioned in the previous talk, because they are risk averse, so they just want to continue using what everybody is already using. So that's definitely one big competitor. In the higher ed, we have encountered Canvas and Blackboard leading the way in many scenarios. And I believe that's because they were already covering the needs of large educational institutions as a complementary tool to in-person classes. And now that they're trying to transition to more online learning, well, they already have the tool. So it's just a simple decision to continue using that. In the corporate vertical, I don't think OpenEdX makes that big a mark. So that doesn't have to be the case, but that's the current state of affairs. Maybe we could leverage some possibilities in terms of offering, along with the technology and the platform, offering ways of accessing content. That would be a big step forward for the corporate vertical. And of course, for MOOC providers and large nonprofits and governments, as again Patrick mentioned for the academia project, OpenEdX is a sweet spot. It's in the sweet spot, but still there is competition. We have seen other companies and other products trying to get into that market as well.
Okay, so we have another question from Jorge.
Sure.
How could OpenEdX improve its position in the market?
Right. So I'll probably go back to the conclusions I was drawing here. I believe trying to make it fit a little bit better into some of the other verticals that are well established and that everybody reviews and everybody discusses and publishes information about and talks about would be one way. And the other way would be stepping up our marketing efforts. We, of course, started already with that, and changes are being made, and there are different things that we're trying to build and publishing. But marketing it's a very hard effort, and you need to invest a lot of resources there to make sure that you articulate a good story for the product and convey that value to a large audience.
Perfect. So the next question will be from Nimisha. She asked, what types of things were accessed in the technology category?
Right. So out of my memory, things like hosting capabilities or flexibility to be hosted in different places. Let me go back here to the slide where I have that. The multi-tenancy possibilities, because this for this exercise, for the organizations we were building this exercise, there was the need of having branches of the sites being published in different languages and in different geographies. The licensing options, internationalization, scalability or capacity of operate at scale, the different options for extending the platform towards actually connecting with external tools or building extensions yourself for the platform. There was data protection compliance and specifically CMS integration.
So heading up to the next question from Estefania, she asked, Juan, if you could have a wish, which vertical would you suggest?
That is really tough. I'm very much invested in the vertical that we're currently in, which basically it's online course operators, just because of the philosophy of trying to disrupt the model, trying to go beyond the boundaries of this is higher ed and this is corporate learning. I truly believe that there is more to it than the classical verticals that have been established. But that's not to say that we can ignore them altogether. And that's part of what I'm trying to convey here. That if the large mission of edX as a project is to actually deliver education at a massive scale worldwide, it definitely needs to work with both the higher ed institutions, for example, who are actually the status quo or the organizations that currently deliver or have been delivering education on large scales worldwide, and also through companies because of this model of lifelong learning. So normally learning takes place, or lifelong learning will take place a lot in the context of your career path and your position in a particular company. So I will stay with the online learning operators, but always keeping in mind at least those two.
Thank you. So the next question will be from Fonitz. She asked, how will the conclusions and the presentation figured in Open edX goals for the next few years in spite of the buyout?
I don't know. I'm not sure if that's for me to say, but I hope this presentation in some ways opens up some conversations about that, and will be definitely very interested in participating in that. And if any of this is useful, any of the insights we and all the providers have collected over the years is useful for helping drive the platforms towards the next stages, that would be terrific.
Heading up to the last question. Well, we got another one. Okay, so Catherine cared as a lot of universities are using Moodle, should Open edX improve the integration Moodle Open edX?
In my view, at least, it's a bit of a replacement. It's hard to think of a scenario where both platforms coexist, not doing the same thing. Of course, I can figure some ideas in that direction, but normally you would use either one or the other, especially because there is a big lock in where you build your contents with, and content reusability. It's an issue. So I'm not sure if integrating the platforms as such, maybe at the authentication level, would make sense. Yep, at that level definitely, but I don't know at other levels. But perhaps for the contents, it would be interesting to think about possibilities of exporting some content that is coming from Moodle and try to import it or transform it into OLX format. And I know there was some attempts to do that a few years ago. I'm not sure how successful that was, but that would be something very interesting. And the other way around as well, perhaps porting content from OpenEdX to Moodle.
So heading up to the last question this time from Adham. He asked, didn't you consider better mobile Android iOS learning support?
We consider that as part of the technology category, if I'm not mistaken. It may have been in the technology category or in the learner experience, because we thought of mobile as usability, as an usability feature, but it is definitely considered. Yep.
Great. So that will be the last question. If you guys have more questions or comments, feel free to do so in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll have to end the presentation by this time. We appreciate your support and comments.
Sure. Also, we can stick around and have discussions in the verse of further sessions.
Sure. So thank you once again for your assistance and participation in the talk.
Right.
Yes, thank you, Juan. This was great and eye-opening. Thank you very much. So we're going to have